All right, so we are live. I see that we do have a lot of attendees already joining in. Uh, awesome. Like we don't have to wait for people to join in. Obviously, while we do the intro, people will
Mm-hmm.
still will be able
Flock
to catch
in.
up. Yes,
Yeah.
catch up with us. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and all those who will be tuning in shortly as well. I'm very excited about today's webinar. So my name is Nizam. I'm the head of growth at Crowd Content. You already know the topic, so I'm not going to bore you with the detail, like the things that we'll be talking about. We have a very special guest, and again, you already know him very well. I was just chatting with him, like I told him, like he makes technical SEO fun, and it just make things easier for the SEO community. So I really appreciate everything that you guys do. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you so much for having me, Nisam. Hey, everybody in the webinar. Oh, wow, already 128 people are joining live. Wow, that's flattering. That's
Yes,
nice.
we did have quite a few people. So during the registration process, we had like a field where people could ask question, where people
Mhm.
say they're a fan, they would just to come and join just to hear what you have to say.
Oh God. Okay. Oh, no pressure.
Not at all. So we're expecting to go probably roughly above 200, 250 live attendees today,
Hmm.
and we'll keep up with that. Let's see how things go. Uh, so one thing, I mean, obviously you do quite a lot of webinar speaking engagement. You go and talk to publics as well outside your normal day to day. So do you want to share something unique about yourself which no one knows yet publicly?
I'm an ice diving instructor as of
No
2 weeks
way.
ago. Yeah.
Okay, that's a super brand new thing. Cool, cool.
So I think I've not shared that publicly yet. So that's a do with that information whatever you want.
Okay. If you ever come to Toronto, we already know, like, you can help us with that for sure. Um, awesome. Well, thank you very much, Martin. I know it's towards the end of your day, but I really appreciate you tuning in. Few housekeeping items before we get started. So we are not going to take any questions today. The session will be roughly 40 minutes each ish, and we have already gathered the information during the registration process. So the session that we'll have today will be based on the input that you have provided during the registration process. So the discussion point,
Mhm.
the topics, they're all summarized based on the feedback that we gathered from everyone. So yeah, like, do you wanna just dig into the things that people wants to know about technical SEO?
I'm super excited to talk about technical SEO in any case. So I'm super excited to hear what the questions are that people have asked.
Okay, awesome. So I'll kick off with the one that I have, and most SEOs, when we prioritize SEO, technical SEO, or other element of SEOs are tend to take priority over technical SEO. So in your word, how important is technical SEO for organic growth and visibility?
The short answer to that is it depends, but the longer answer is that um, technical SEO, non-technical SEO, one can't live without the other. So if you are prioritizing technical SEO when you have glaring content problems or site structure problems or usability problems, then no amount of technical SEO will help to alleviate that. So then you're spending a lot of time and effort and you don't really get any of the benefits. On the other hand, if your content is looking great and everything is fine and you crossed your T's and dotted your I's, but the technical side of things prevents Google from seeing part of the content or even all of the content, then again, there's no amount of work that you can put into the non-technical side of things that will help you with that. So
Mhm.
one can't be without the other, which means that you would have to look at where the blocker is. It's kind of like a barrel with water inside.
Mhm.
If one of the pieces of wood, one of the planks that the barrel is made from, is shorter than the others, then that's where the water is going to overflow, and no adding water will actually fix that, and no
Mhm.
increasing the length of the other other planks will increase or allow you to pour more water in until you fix that one. So you would want to identify the part of your SEO strategy that is lacking the most and where the biggest improvement can be done for the lowest amount of effort. That
Mm-hmm.
might be technical SEO, that might be non-technical SEO. So
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to say one is more important than the other, or even saying they are equally important, because that's simply not true. Because if you are like nailing your technical SEO but completely ignore your non-technical SEO,
Mm-hmm.
you might actually see problems and you might not have any way to overcome them because you're fixing it at the wrong spot, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. So definitely, backlink isn't the only thing people should be caring about when doing SEO optimization. So I mean that's a great background, and I really appreciate that. So let's say someone, an SEO or a general marketing generalist, like they are getting into optimizing their website, or they already have done it, and they want to get into more technical side of things. So where do they should begin? Where is their starting mark for people? The tools, the data source, the manual check. Where do you would you say that people should begin?
That's a tricky one. I think Google Search Console is a great tool to begin and also to dig deeper. So it can take you quite a bit in the journey. I think having some rough knowledge about a crawling tool might also be helpful, because that way you can figure out how a crawler would experience your site, which is what every search engine eventually has to do. So if a
Mm-hmm.
crawler highlights or shows problems, then that actually can help you identify problems that you might not spot otherwise. Um, because Google Search Console gives you kind of like the inside view. So it shows you data from within Google. If you are dealing with Bing, the Bing Webmaster Tools are fantastic as well. Um, and then a crawler gives you kind of like the outside view of how a crawler would consume your website. Doesn't mean that a problem that a crawler finds necessarily is a problem for a search engine, but it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely good to understand both of these tools. Also, I very much like when people are familiarizing themselves with log file analysis. I know that in many organizations you're not getting access to log files that easily, but generally, if you have access to log files or can get some sort of access to log files, that's definitely helpful, because allows you to understand what's happening on your website behind the curtain, so to speak, behind the
Mm-hmm.
stage, um, which is, I think, important. And then just learn as you go. Try to understand what's holding you back. Try to understand what tools you have available to find out where the problem is and how to fix the problem. And then just learn as you go. As you find problems, learn how to solve them and spot them quicker in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about crawler, which is I know that crawling, rendering, index, your favorite topic of discussion. So one of the most ways most SEOs use robot.txt is to tell Google or other bots what to crawl, what not to crawl. Do you have any
Mhm.
guidance on the do's and don'ts for robot.txt, the best practices?
Again, it highly depends on your specific setup of site, but fundamentally, robots.txt is a very powerful tool, so you don't want to use it without understanding what you're doing. I'd rather have more, it's good to err on the side of more crawling, less restriction. The more
Mm-hmm.
you restrict, the more likely you are to restrict things that you shouldn't restrict in the first place. Very, very few sites actually have to manage their crawl budget. And when I say that, I mean sites with a lot more than a million or even more than 10 million pages would want to start looking into managing their crawl budget. That's
Mm-hmm.
where the robots.txt can come in and help you. Most websites, especially the smaller ones, don't really need to worry about the robots.txt. If you're not sure how the robots.txt works or how exactly it can affect crawling, don't
Mm-hmm.
touch it. Don't make yourself fall for problems that you don't even need to be addressing in the first place. So unless you know exactly what you're doing, steer clear of robots.txt. If you know
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing, great. Use
That's
that
good.
as a tool.
That's great. So I'd like to dig deeper into both like the restriction as well as the call budget. So for the restriction specifically, the can robot.txt, the blockers that people usually put, can that block their rendering or cause rendering issue? So one of the examples that I'll give you, I was looking through some of the website from participant from today's session. And the website looks great on the browser, as well as, you go to Google's cache version, you see the site looks exactly same. However, some sites, they look great on the browser, but if you check the Google cache version, you see only text. You don't see it's fully rendered. You don't see fully visible. Is that something that Robot60 could cause, or there's underlying issue which could be?
Yeah. It can be something else, but robots.txt is definitely a factor that can play into these things. And that's exactly what I mean. Like, a bunch of people are like, oh, we have like APIs that are meant to be consumed by our front ends and our mobile apps, and I don't see why we would need to crawl them. But honestly, I don't see a reason why we wouldn't need to crawl them. And then, especially if it's a client-side rendered application where the JavaScript needs to actually fetch the actual site content from these APIs, if you are disallowing that in robots.txt, then that works fantastically fine in your browser. It works fantastically fine for the users. But robots like Googlebot will then not be able to make requests to your API and thus not be able to fetch the content. And content that we can't fetch means we can't see. So as far as Googlebot knows, the content doesn't exist. And if that's happening, then you have tried to optimize something that wasn't a problem in the first place, and you've now created a serious problem out of thin air. So I'd rather not.
Absolutely.
Happens quite often. Yeah.
It does. I've seen it quite a lot of time. I'm just trying to understand, like, what people, obviously everyone has their own unique situations, right? Let's say someone, they don't block anything, they just keep everything open for everyone, running the CSS, JavaScript, all the source resources available to the site. Would that impact the loading speed in any way,
No.
if they were to open everything up?
No.
Okay.
It doesn't.
Oh, that's great. So digging deeper to the crawl budget for a larger website, how often Googlebot crawl the website resources, like the theme file, the CSS and JavaScript, and is there a way to tell Google, okay, don't crawl my resources every time, but call my content every time you come? Or is there a way to manage the crawling from the website?
Not really, and neither should you. We're pretty good at figuring it out. We do overcrawl rather than undercrawl, but again, that is very rarely ever a problem that you need to manage. And again, if anything that you can try to manage it is likely to also potentially invite problems in later on. So I would not mess with that unless you really, really have good reason. And if you really, really have good reason, there's plenty of documentation out there that helps you to figure it out with like HTTP status codes, yada, yada, rate limiting. There are ways to do these things. I would not touch them unless I'm 100% sure that there is a problem. And
that makes
99% there isn't a problem.
That makes sense. I think we overcomplicate most of the time when we think about, setting things up. One other thing related to the index, when, quite a lot of people wanted to know that as well. Hacking is growing. The community, people are, being attacked by different types of hacking attempt on the website. So one of the common issues that even I personally have seen, site gets hacked and then they create tons of spammy pages and they even get indexed somehow. What is the best way to deal or tackle a situation like this, or remove those pages from Google index eventually?
The best idea there is to figure out how they got in, fix that, maybe strive for a simpler setup that is harder to fall prey to these attacks. And then also just remove the pages as quickly as you can. Remove them from your site. Google will figure it out. If you're getting a 404 there, I wouldn't try to like redirect or something. I would just try to remove them so that they do a 404 and they'll fall out of the index quite quickly. So that's something that works itself out usually over a while.
Okay, that's great. Moving into the whole debate about subdomain versus subdirectories, do you have any best practice recommendations, especially for blogs? Just use whatever you want.
It depends. Either way may make sense for one or the other company. Everything that we have in the documentation for that, I don't have anything to add to that. It is highly case specific.
Okay, that's great. And related to, like, I promise this is the last one regarding the crawl budget or crawling. If I use subdomain for a blog, for a blog section, for example, would that help improving the crawl or improve crawl efficiency, let's say, because it will be considered as a separate domain per se or separate website than my main website. Does that help in any way? Would that be better for crawling my site or getting my content
It's not better,
indexed?
it's not worse. Makes not much of a difference to us.
Okay. So just like leave it what it is and then do based on your
Yeah,
situation.
yeah.
Okay. That's great. Awesome. So moving into, I mean, I know that there's a big, huge debate around this, like, the whole subdomain and subdirectories. People are always like confused, what should I use? But yeah, I guess like everyone has their own situations and own
Yeah.
ways of doing things. Um, moving into the marketing script. So as a marketer, one of the challenges that we have, not that we have to use all the script, but it helps with tracking, different
Hmm.
journey, the data that we have. So
Hmm.
the right, obviously, if we use 5 to 6 scripts, it kind of slows the website down. Would you recommend that we change the script to do async or defer it, or even download the script and run it from self-hosted script?
I would recommend to remove as much tracking as you can because it's usually A, pretty pointless, B, most of the time not really used anymore, and you most of the tools can do most of the things, so you will have some duplication just because of ridiculous reasons, like, oh, I like this diagram better in this tool, I like this thing and better in the other tool. Try to
Mm-hmm.
find one tool that gives you the data that you need for the
Mm-hmm.
time that you need it. Once you don't need the data anymore, or for the time that you don't need the data anymore, remove it. The best JavaScript is the JavaScript that you don't need, and with tracking specifically, that's something that serves you and not the user. So you
Mm-hmm.
definitely want to get rid of as many trackers as you possibly can. That being said, if you have trackers that you can't get rid of,
Mm-hmm.
try to defer them to as late as possible in the process, so that the users can interact and start using the page, and then only trackers come as late as possible in the process. If you can offload them into like CDNs or static hosting somewhere, that's great. If you can't, that's also okay. But
Mm-hmm.
try to minimize the amount of JavaScript. Try to offload it as much as possible. If you can put it on a separate host, the separate host is not as important for HTTP2 and HTTP3, but it
Mm-hmm.
used to be very important for HTTP1. So if you're still on HTTP1 web servers, then you definitely want to branch that out into like a separate subdomain or something, so that you have more parallel connections available for the trackers. But the number one rule is as few as possible.
That makes sense. Talking about speed, how important would you say the core web vital in 2023, and what are the top items that you should, you know,
I mean,
consider?
I mean, don't think about the Core Web Vitals primarily as an SEO tool. Think about it as a user experience tool. SEO is pointless if you're ranking high and you get lots of clicks from the search engine, but then everyone is pissed off by the terrible, slow website that you are, and
Mm-hmm.
they go away again, because then you're not making any business. In the end, making business is what pays your bills, not the ranking, not the amount of clicks that you get from the search engine. What you care about is that people actually order the service that you are, or the product that you're creating, whatever it is that your website is trying to get across. You want conversions. So Core Web Vitals is a fantastic way to look at if there is any technical reason for people to not like your website. And I mean, all of us know that if you are on a phone and you want to quickly buy something and it just takes ages, and then it shows you the product and you tap on the product and nothing happens, eventually you just open a second tab of another shop. That one loads quickly. You put it in the
Mm-hmm.
shopping basket. You go to checkout, you bought it, and then you don't need to be in the slow, terrible web shop anymore. So you lost a customer. So
Mm-hmm.
that the idea behind Core Web Vitals is to try to quantify that, to put numbers to what real world users are experiencing. So this is not as much about search as it is about user experience. And that's
Mm-hmm.
a very, very helpful thing to think about it. That being said, obviously, as search, we also know that websites that are fast are usually more popular with users and do fulfill the user's intention better than websites that suck at that. So it is important. It is just not the most important thing. So if you have a terrible website,
Mm-hmm.
but it's fast, that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
help you because it's still a terrible website. If you
Yeah.
have a great website and it's terrible, slow, and annoying, then that's something that you can easily quantify through Core Web Vitals. And I know that fixing that is hard, but you might
Mm-hmm.
even be able to fix it.
Yeah.
And you have the data that backs up your decisions to fix it. So
That absolutely makes sense. So talking about numbers, when we use the tool Google PageSpeed Insight, and we run a site or URL, we see like the one that comes as a core Web Vital assessment, and you also have the diagnosis, a performance issue. The numbers usually tend to be different. Do you have any thoughts on why they're different, and what does that mean?
Sorry, which numbers again are different?
So let's say the first time to buy, it's like the numbers at the top that usually
Right.
appears. So they are I think from a real example based on how Google sees it looks different than when I run it on the tool at the bottom. It might look a little different.
Yeah. So, and you're talking about PageSpeed Insights specifically, right? So
Correct.
PageSpeed Insights is a tricky one. PageSpeed Insights gives you a rough ballpark. It's not. It also gives you like a score in the end. The score is mostly meaningless. It is basically just giving you a rough idea. So what happens when you run PageSpeed Insights is you are asking some computer somewhere to fetch the website and then analyze it and then show you the analysis. That's what we call lab data, because it's not a real user. It is some server somewhere doing an experiment basically by fetching your website. And it can happen that if you are a business that operates in the United States, for instance, but the server happens to be in Australia, then that is going to take, everything is going to take longer. And depending on what device the server emulates, it might just be like a device that is a lot slower than the device of your users. So you might get a pretty bad score, but then when you're using it from a device that your user would use it on and from the United States, you might find, why, this is actually reasonably fast. That's why they also show you real user metrics when available. That's kind of field data. That is from actual people visiting your website and how they experienced it. If everyone is on a really, really fast phone and everyone is in the United States and they get a good experience, and that's what you're going to see in these numbers, in the field data numbers. And then you are actually, honestly, you're fine, right? The field data is more important than the lab data, because the lab data is just for you to get a feeling for it. Because what you can do, what you can use the lab data for is you have an old version of your website, you run a few field tests, and you then get roughly, there's heuristics involved. So you might, like, the first test might be giving you like 90, the second test might give you an 85, the next test might give you a 92 score.
Right.
And then you're like, okay, yeah, I think we're reasonably fast. And then when you're building the new version of your website, you do that again. And now you're getting a 50 and a 45 and a 57. And that is objectively worse than it has been before. So then you want to figure out why it is worse than what you had before. Or alternatively around, if that is the old version and it has given you these numbers, then your new version is objectively better. That doesn't mean that this is what Google sees. That's not what Google sees. Well, that's what you see when you run the test, and that gives you an idea to compare things. But it's not necessarily like the real answer. The real answer is in the real user metrics. Obviously, there will be no real user data before you launch your new version of your website, but you can run the test on the new version of the website and get an idea of how the lab data compares. The real world data might then still be disagreeing with it, and I would always look for the real user metrics rather than the field data rather than the lab data. So that's
that
where
makes
that's
sense.
coming from.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense, and I really appreciate the background. One of the common one most of the time comes out of the core Web Vital, let's say, analysis through the PageSpeed Insight is the eliminate render blocking resources. So that's the one takes most of the hit for most websites. Do you have any thoughts on how someone should tackle those, go through the resources and unblock them? Like how would that work?
So render blocking resources, that's always a fun one, and actually that's one that is potentially very hard to actually fix as well. It depends a lot on your setup, it depends a lot on your resources. Generally, the idea is to get the content to the user as quickly as possible, and there are certain things that can make that slower than they need to be. So for instance, if you have CSS, that means that's effectively instructions on where things are going, like an assembly manual. If the CSS is super huge, it has to read all the CSS. It has to download all the CSS. It has to read all the CSS and understand it, and then apply it to the page. The bigger that is, the harder it is to actually do that quickly. So what you could try to do is you could try to work out, because what many websites are doing is they have like one CSS file for
Mm-hmm.
everything. They have 10 different kinds of web page templates, like product overview, landing page, article detail, or whatever, blog post, all of that in one big file. So you're always downloading the entire huge file. You're always having, the browser always has to read and understand the whole big file,
Mm-hmm.
even though you are on a product detail page. So I don't need the CSS for the landing page, for the blog, for the I don't know, like shopping cart, for the
Mm-hmm.
category pages. I don't need any of that. So you can try to split it up by page template, so that
Mm-hmm.
you're no longer having one large file, but you're having a bunch of smaller files that allows
Mm-hmm.
you to only download the file that you need for this specific page, which makes it a lot faster. If I give you a book with 250 pages of instructions, and
Mm-hmm.
for you only 10 pages in the middle are relevant, that is freaking frustrating for you as a human, because you have
Yeah.
to read through the entire book to find the 10 pages that actually make sense. If I give you a leaflet, a pamphlet with like 10 pages, and all of them are relevant, that is going to be a quicker process. Same with the browser. If he has to read through this huge book to then
Mm-hmm.
find the few things that actually matter in this case,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to slow you down. That's one thing. The other thing are like images, for instance. So if it's images that are further below the fold, so to speak, why would you have? Because what happens is then like the browser receives the HTML
Mm-hmm.
and then receives the first image. So it stops everything, downloads the image, and then continues on with the HTML, sees the next image. And instead of actually showing the rest of the page, it is hung in this image. And if this image is not on screen and not going to be on screen anytime soon, then you
Mm-hmm.
could lazy load this in the background. You could tell the browser, like, there's an image, doesn't matter at this point, move on. And then it
Mm-hmm.
basically does that in the background, which allows you to not get hung up on these things. The other thing is JavaScript. JavaScript is the typical one because a lot of tools, especially trackers, want to be in the head so that they
Mm-hmm.
get executed as early as possible. But also trackers can do a lot of things. So they're similar to the CSS problem. You download
Mm-hmm.
this one, or you have this one script from a tracker. It can do 1,000 things. You're only using it for one thing. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
a heat map or something, for instance, but it can do
Yeah.
1,000 other things. So the browser has to run the program for all the things, even though you're not doing them. It
Mm-hmm.
has to understand what the program does and has to compile the program and run the program. And that just takes time. And then
Mm-hmm.
by simply shifting that as far down in your HTML as possible without it breaking and stopping to work, that might already help you, because then the website is being parsed and displayed as it is being parsed, and then the user sees something, and then the JavaScript kicks in. It might lead to you losing out a few of the users, or the few of the visitors might not be tracked, but
Mm-hmm.
that comes at the benefit of not making everything slower for everyone. So that's a tricky one to do usually, because obviously the tracker company, or the third party JavaScript companies, don't necessarily give you instructions on how to do that, and
Mm-hmm.
you might have to work it out yourself. But it is worthwhile investigating if you can. And then again, the fastest JavaScript is the script that is not on the page. So remove everything that you can remove.
Absolutely. No, this is very insightful. That almost reminded me. Uh, one of the if let's say you are using WordPress, lots of audience here people does.
Mm,
I think there are plugins that you could use to exclude the scripts that you don't need on specific
hmm.
pages, which you recommended. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's awesome
absolutely.
tactic.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um,
absolutely.
we'll definitely install it on our website today.
It's not
um,
easy to do. It sounds easy and an obvious win, but it's not an easy thing to do usually. It does involve quite a bit of trial and error and
mhm.
figuring things out as you go along. Fishing in the dark.
That makes sense though, because like, what if you think that this script is not needed, and then you do that, and then this page is broken? You know the information
Mm,
you want to portray is not working. So that's definitely yeah. I would also caution everyone to no go rogue on this. Don't install plugin because we said so. Um, Awesome. Well, it touched on the JavaScript and CSS specifically. I think one of the other common one for the page speed inside our overall, like the speed that impacted by those resources are like reduce unused JavaScript and CSS, which I think you said to exclude them.
yeah.
Would minifying help in any way? This Cloudflare helps with minifying the scripts and
Yes.
CSS.
Yes, it does, because it's the same. It's the same thing. So minifying actually reduces it. It helps in a very specific way though. So it helps with two things. By shortening the amount of data that needs to be transferred, it actually speeds up the download times, because
Mm-hmm.
it just, if you are on a 3G connection, it just takes a certain amount of time to download 100 kilobytes. So if you can bring your JavaScript down from, let's say, like a megabyte to 500 kilobytes, that is a huge time saver already, because these download times are shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. The other one is that the less you have to read, it's again, am I giving you like the 1,000-page book, or am I giving you a 10-page book?
Right.
It's with minification, usually it's not as big. It usually just reduces it by a factor of, I don't know, like 10% maybe. But still, less to read and less to execute means faster execution and faster parsing. So it speeds up download and parsing. It doesn't necessarily speed up the effect of running the script, or running the program. So
Mm-hmm.
again, the best strategy is to avoid whatever program you don't need to run. So, um, but it does help a bit. Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, I think most people use Cloudflare so that they have really
Yeah.
awesome feature, which is pretty cool. If you guys would like to try, by all means, give it a try. Again,
You
use
do
you
want to
as
test that very carefully though, because every now and then it does break your code, and then you don't know why it's broken, because you didn't do anything. It's the CDN did it for you. So it happens very rarely, but it might happen. So you do want to definitely test that carefully.
that is true. Is
It's not a
Google
magic bullet.
will Google Search Console pick those errors if, let's say, CDN somehow messed the rendering of the website?
Um, Only in the case of content missing, you can catch it by the content missing in the rendered HTML. But generally, unless you go look for it, you don't get notified or anything.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I believe, like, obviously, the tool crawling tool, like, I think Ahrefs does a really good job with side.net and skimming from. People could utilize those as well, like, to identify issues related to that, right?
Sorry,
Um,
run it again.
no, I'm saying, like, if
Ah,
people can use those tools to kind of flag these errors, if
yeah,
they would like to.
yeah.
One of the other interesting one, which you talked a little bit about images, obviously with mobile first indexing and prioritizing your content for people visiting from mobile devices is extremely important to have it loaded faster. Would
Mhm.
you recommend that, there are plugins and tools which can dissect your images into different sizes for different
Mhm.
devices? Is that the best practice, or would you say have one version but have it properly optimized in terms of size, kilobyte, and then
I think having multiple sizes offered is actually a really good technique, because obviously on a larger screen you want higher resolution. You also most likely have a faster, more stable connection,
Mhm.
and then that way you leave it to the browser and the user and the circumstances to figure out which version they should display. So I think that's a good performance improvement if you can make that happen.
Okay, that's great. I know we are very close to our closing time. I've got like two or three quick ones. The schema markup, obviously, that's
Yeah.
one of the other interesting one that everyone is nowadays exploring. So I think that with everything with the EAT and improving your content, providing value, one of the good things comes with it, the SME subject matter expert. For someone that they are subject matter expert, would you recommend the person schema or the author schema to improve their credibility with Google's providing, like, these are the publications they
Yeah.
have that
Either way, I mean, if they're the author of an article, put it as the author. If they are someone who worked on something, then probably the person markup is the better one.
Mhm.
But fundamentally, the author markup is person markup. So
Yeah, that makes sense. One of my personal favorite one was the website migration. So if you're changing server and the domain, those are pretty fairly straightforward, given the server is exactly the same
mhm.
performance as the one that you're migrating from. The one with rebranding, changing the entire code and scripts and everything behind the scene, except the content. What are the best practices that someone should follow when they're rebranding the site or changing redesigning the entire site? That does impact the performance a little bit in terms of the
I
ranking.
mean, I mean, I'm not really answering ranking questions in general, but the more careful you can map out a strategy to move from the old to the new state is the better. So
Mhm,
if you can move small, if you can make small moves, as in like maybe have the exact same content, the exact same structure, um, on a server that you know behaves the same. And again, crawling tools come into play here, where you can basically like crawl the old site and then crawl the new site and see if there's like issues coming up on the new one that haven't been happening on the old one, or if the performance degrades there. Uh, Move to a new server, then maybe move to a new domain if you need to move to a new domain, and then wait a little bit until things have like ironed out and normalized again, because there will be fluctuations when you do these things. And
mhm,
then once the fluctuations stop, you can start restructuring and rethinking your site structure. And again, if you can launch that in smaller batches, that's definitely a safe game to play. So yeah, don't try to do everything at once. Try to package it up nicely and carefully. We have like a blog post about side moves, I think, and we do have like a podcast episode on side moves, I think, as well, where Gary, John, and Lizzie are probably explaining it a lot better and in more detail than I could.
mhm. I will take those resources and definitely link it with the recording or the blog that we produce from this session, so everyone will have access to that for sure. Um, awesome. Well, thank you very much. And the other interesting question that actually one of the attendees asked during the registration, which was, so they are not tech savvy. They're not developer. They don't understand SEO, and they're trying to hire a technical SEO consultant or someone to help them with technical SEO. What are the questions that they should ask to know that, okay, this person knows what they're doing?
Oh my God, that's hard because technical SEO is still such a broad field. I mean, if you're non-technical, what are the questions you would ask in SEO? And there's a bunch of good SEOs that are specializing in one area that if you ask them in another area, they have no idea. And I think
Mhm,
technical SEO is the same. I don't know what questions to ask a technical SEO to know they're good at what they're doing. What you should expect from them is that they should have a a way to explain to you what they're doing, why they're doing it, or what they're recommending, why they're recommending it, what is the situation now, what is the situation they expect after the change, how long and how much effort will it be to do this, and they should be talking to your developer resources, whoever that is. If you have a dev team on site, if you have an agency, they need to be talking to them, not to you, because if you are in the middle, then it's going to be a game of telephone. So you want them to talk to whoever has to do the changes after all.
yeah.
And if these people push back and say like all of that is bonkers, then that's a bad sign. Then you should probably trust your developers and ask them to clarify and prove that what they're suggesting is coming from a trustworthy source. What you should not get is you should not get someone who sends over a PDF that was created from a tool or just based on a tool that just has like random recommendations that they can't back up. If they're like, oh, here we have a problem because the title is not what's in the H1, then that's
Hmm.
something like it doesn't really matter. So why do you think this matters? And then usually eventually it comes out that a tool that they have been using has said that, and they don't
Hmm.
really understand why, and they don't understand that this tool might just be outdated,
Right.
or might just give like not very helpful recommendations. In that case, they should be able to have experience with how to implement this, and they should be able to talk to your developers. If that's not possible, then there is something fishy going on
Hmm.
that needs further technical due diligence, I would say.
That makes sense. So one follow-up question that I have, those who they like, they don't know much about the technical SEO or the overall like the dev side of it. If they would like to learn more, obviously you have tons of videos that you're publishing every now and then. Those are great resources. Where do they can begin to learn more about technical SEO, getting themselves comfortable with doing more tech changes or changes?
Yeah. I think learning JavaScript and learning HTML and learning CSS is a good idea. There's plenty of courses around the web that teach you how to make your own websites, and also how
Mhm.
to build your own web applications that are more dynamic and interactive. There are tech SEO courses. I'm sure there's plenty of people providing these, and I'm pretty sure a lot of them are fantastic as well, but I can't really vouch for a specific one. You can follow our video channel on YouTube. If you look on YouTube for Google Search Central, we are putting out content every now and then. Our developer documentation, developers.google.com/search, has plenty of pointers as well. So if you're interested in getting more into technical SEO, try things out. That's the beauty of the web. It's really easy to build a website and just try things out and see what happens.
Right.
If you do that on the side, if you do that with a small experimental website that then like tanks from the rankings, who cares? Just don't do it on your main business, on your main breadwinner.
Yeah, don't break the public side of the company website.
Yeah, that should not be your test bed. You want to test it somewhere small. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, awesome. I know that we promised 40 minutes. I really appreciate your time, Martin, and thank you everyone for joining. It was really great chatting with you. It was very insightful, at least for me, for sure. And I really appreciate you joining in and sharing and share your thoughts on some of the challenges that our SEO communities they have.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I do hope that it was useful and fun, and hope to see you soon again. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Martin. Bye.